The most competitive congressional race in Maryland is the 6th District. It's an open seat because Democrat David Trone vacated to run for the U.S. Senate during the primary, and the district's political makeup is what makes it so competitive. It includes a portion of Montgomery County that is a Democratic stronghold, as well as more conservative-leaning western counties. Republican Neil Parrott and Democrat April McClain Delaney are the candidates asking for your vote. And just a few weeks ago, we spoke with Mr. Parrott, and today we are joined by Ms. Delaney. She's a resident of Potomac, an attorney, and former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Communication and Information at the Commerce Department. And if the last name Delaney sounds familiar, her husband John Delaney held the same office from 2013 to 2019. It is so good to have you here in studio.
Thank you. I think it's really important to be here and to really talk about our races.
We've got a lot of ground to cover. As I just mentioned, the 6th District is one of the most competitive, right? It has the potential to flip the House. What made you want to run for office?
Well, I actually think that we need to turn, I think people are really tired of this toxic, divisive atmosphere that we have, and I decided to run as a common sense, common ground candidate, a mom of 4, really committed to helping working families get things done, and also to protect our girls' reproductive freedoms and rights. And this microcosm of America, you know, which is really America in miniature, red, blue, suburban, rural, urban. It's really important, I think, to message about how you can lift up and improve people's lives.
When you say you're running on, common sense politics, I wanted to touch on that because, how do you communicate to voters when we're watching politics become increasingly partisan? Where do you go with that?
Such a great question. And, I spent the bulk of my life, I'm a communications attorney. I grew up in Idaho. I'm a farmer's daughter. Went to school on scholarship. Came to the DC area and met my husband, but I think it's really important in this age of platforms in which there's a lot of misinformation, a lot of amplification of hate speech and different types of information, that you really meet voters where they are. You get out into the district, you talk about their problems, you really talk about how you can improve their lives, and come on shows like this. So it's just really important to show up. And then to talk about what really motivates you and who you are as a person.
Let's talk about some of your top priorities should you win.
So my top priorities, I must say, are, one, in the 6th District, there's it's very diverse, from Montgomery County to Frederick, Allegheny, Garrett, and Washington. I always say it's a purple district with not as many purple people. It's very blue and red, a lot of independents in the middle. But, my top priorities are really driving infrastructure investment. I worked in the Commerce Department. I helped roll out rural broadband. I have a technology background, and so for years I worked at Common Sense Media. I opened their DC office here. I worked on online safety for kids, hate speech, but with this skyrocketing anxiety and depression with a lot of our teens, we can have more mental health resources. And I think it's really important in Congress to put bumpers and safeguards for our kids and for all of us on some of this information and technology, but also to drive infrastructure investment for good paying jobs into the 6, including from CHIPS, from the IRA and green energy, and from rural broadband, which I helped to roll out at Commerce. And the last thing I think it's really important, because I do have 4 daughters from 17 to 31, that there's really an assault on women's, reproductive freedoms and even some of their broader rights. And so I'm very focused on that. So working families and then women.
Yeah, I want to touch on infrastructure real quick. When you think of 270 heading north, you've said you would consider widening it. Is that something that you would still?
Yeah, I just had big signs that I'm putting up all over the district. It is really important to drive infrastructure in terms of widening 270, US 1581, because it's not only about economic development and gridlock, it's really about that they're very unsafe roads. And I really think you could have 4 lanes all the way to Frederick, at least 3. It would not only help gridlock, but I said most recently on COJO, since I've started running, it was a year ago this week, I've seen 4 major accidents, and this is just going up twice a week or more, on 270, trucks flipped on their side, people who've died, and it's really about thinking about how we make them safer. In addition, helping the ferry over to Virginia, they, to get more investment and good paying jobs and more companies to come back into Western Maryland. We really need to invest in that infrastructure.
I wanted to talk about the economy and inflation. We know that people are saying, look, it's tough out there making ends meet day to day. How would you make life better in terms of the economy for Marylanders?
Well, first of all, I hear about affordability of groceries, of housing all the time. And this is really, I think, not just across the 6th District in Maryland, across our whole country. It's very important. I think there's federal and state and local issues that can all address some of these things. But I really think re-upping the child care tax credit, very important to put money back into hardworking families, to build on some of the drug affordability in terms of, negotiating on drug prices and really looking at how we can make health care more affordable. Really looking at, cutting red tape and zoning and permitting and working with local authorities and how we can have higher density, more affordable housing. And then even looking at ways of subsidies in terms of affordable housing as well. But good paying jobs are really important, and I am focused on that in the 6th District.
Let's go back to housing. As you just touched on, people are really struggling with housing prices, mortgages, things of that nature. What are your proposals there specifically to help people?
That's also a great question. First of all, it's access to capital, it's supply. There's a lot of different issues that are driving this across the country. I think one, we've really got to look at ways that we can, like I said, bring down some of the cost of housing. And there's a lot of proposals being floated. Even some of these local authorities and city. I know in Frederick, they're looking at donating some of the land that they have on a county basis and working with developers and almost helping them with the zoning, permitting, and the donation of the land so that it helps the developers bring down the cost as you're buying. But in addition, I think really looking at Fannie and Freddie Mac and access after the 2008 meltdown and the access to credit, it became very hard to get a mortgage. And so looking at ways you can have more affordability with and looking at ways that we can work with these larger organizations to bring down and have more access to credit.
Let's talk about immigration and the border. You have been quoted as saying humane immigration reform is urgent. What does that mean? And what solutions do you have to support that in a bipartisan sense?
Well, I think, I'm not sure where you took that from. My take on immigration is that we have to have a bipartisan, comprehensive immigration bill. And that includes, and I'm very firm on this, securing the border. We cannot have open borders. More border, more border agents, more technology at the border, but also having a pathway to legal citizenship, not only for our dreamers, but for those who are here with, legal work visas and green cards. And really also the asylum mess, we have to give more resources so that we don't have these 2 and 3 year lag times until you get a hearing. We've got to be much more aggressive about figuring out how to deal with this, but then also for those that are here, of course, helping them that they are treated humanely, and of course not separating parents and kids at the border. That's ridiculous.
Let's talk about where you stand on the Dreamers. Anything you'd like to add there?
Well, I think we have to have a pathway to legal citizenship. Many of these Dreamers have never known another country. They couldn't go back to their home country. I mean, and we are a land of immigrants. I understand how we need to close the border, but for those that are here and have been working, paying taxes, have gone to school here their whole life, we have to figure out a way that they can, find that pathway to citizenship in a way which is streamlined. And I have to go back to work visas. I mean, sometimes it will take 2, 3, 6 months, a year just to get a simple stamp. And we need to keep some of those highly trained workers that we educate here or, that have skills overseas that we can bring in because it is really a race technologically and, with engineering, science, STEM. We want to make sure we have some of the best workers in the world coming here and also training and working with our own workforce to make sure that we have both U.S. competitiveness but also trained workers.
You touched on this at the beginning of our interview, reproductive rights, specifically abortion rights. What should Congress's role be moving forward?
Well, I cannot believe that Roe v. Wade and 50 years of precedent was overturned by the Supreme Court. And it is something that my opponent, Neil Parrott, has been not a proponent of women's rights and reproductive freedoms. I think that we need to codify Roe v. Wade. We've got to make sure that women have control over their bodies, bodily integrity. And it's not only just about life. I think sometimes it's about control of women physically, politically, economically. Women should have the ability to understand and to have a baby when they want to have it. But of course, these ridiculous signs, that you see at the polling about, babies born at 8 and 9 months and then taken and aborted. Who does that? That's ridiculous. I'm a mother of 4 daughters, and this is an important issue for me because in my 30s, I almost died of an ectopic pregnancy. And I grew up in Idaho. If I had had that ectopic pregnancy now in West Virginia or Idaho and not had the procedure, I most certainly would die. So this is really a matter of life and death.
Let's talk about question 1. It's on the Maryland ballot. So if the ballot measure is passed, it would amend the state constitution to enshrine reproductive freedom.
That's correct.
Where do you stand on this ballot measure?
Of course, I would say yes, you have to vote yes on the ballot. And there's a lot of misinformation, I must say, out there about this. It is so important that we do this because, our reproductive freedoms should not, now it's being left to the states and until we codify it on a national level. And if we don't codify that, then it's not enshrined. And God forbid something happened that we are not able to have those reproductive freedoms. I will say you're seeing at the ballot these very interesting signs that say it's all about sex changes for kids and that it allows that, and that you're going to send your kids to school and parents won't know about it. That's absurd. I was talking to Karen Lewis Young, who helped write that. She said, this is not what it says. This is really about reproductive freedoms. And I think that there is a lot of misinformation being spewed out there at the ballots. I also will say my opponent said that he would not, he sponsored a personhood bill in the state house, and it had a long and clear record of saying he thought that the overturning of Roe v. Wade was a wonderful and great thing. But his initial bill that he proposed had no exceptions for rape, incest, or life of a mother, and that is something that is really important.
I wanted to touch on that. Speaking of your opponent, at a candidates forum, your opponent brought up that you do not live in the 6th district. You live in Potomac. So can you effectively advocate for the district if you don't live there? And I did want to mention too, I did want to note that candidates are not legally required to live in their district, but we wanted to ask you that question.
Yes, these seats used to be at large, and I think that's why the historical reason. But I haven't moved. My house was in the district, then it was half a block from the district, and then went, as is a few miles up River Road. And I might also note that Congressman Trone, who's been an excellent member and shown up everywhere, great constituent services, also does not live in the district right now. But I would say no, it makes no difference, because why? This is such a huge district. From Montgomery County all the way to Allegheny, Garrett, and Washington. To Deep Creek Lake, it's almost a 3.5 to 4 hour ride. It is so big. What's important is that you understand the district, the diverse stakeholders, that you know how to bring home resources, community project grants, and to really have excellent constituent services. And I think it's really important to show up everywhere. And I well know this district. I've traveled it for years. I knew it from John. I knew it before. I know every part of it. I know all the stakeholders. And growing up in Idaho, I know the rural part, but also being in Montgomery County and having public, private, and I have 30 years of legal, public, private, and nonprofit experience. Being able to leverage that to actually get things done and bring things home to the district is what you need.
We've got about a minute left, I would say. We know how important undecided voters are in this race. It is so competitive. What would you say to them?
I would say I ran for this seat because I so care about the future that our kids are going to inherit. From education to affordable housing to inflation. But you know what? My platform is common sense, common ground. And I spent my whole life in nonprofit. I always said I was kid partisan, not Republican or Democrat, but kid partisan. And that's how you get things done, by actually lifting up and coming together. My opponent, on the other hand, was rated the least effective member of Congress by Maryland Matters for his 12 years because, they call it the tattoo HIV positive people, to had complete abortion bans, weaken domestic violence laws. And it's not, I only say that in contrast, that you can't be too radical or so extreme. He's more extreme than not only Elsa Brooks, but Hogan. And I actually, like Hogan, have a really common sense, common ground platform, as does Angela, and believe in getting things done. Because we need to have trust in our government, trust in who we are as Americans, and coming together in dialogue. And unless we do things, then we're going to have this pent up anger. So I do it as, I guess, a mom, as someone who spent 30 years and much of it in public service and nonprofit and government. And I'm lifting up because I care about how we can actually make a brighter, more inclusive future for our kids.
Well, look, thank you so much for taking the time. I certainly appreciate the conversation that we had today.
Thank you.
And we appreciate you being here in studio.
And it's really important that local news covers this. Yeah. So you guys, kudos to you.
Thank you. We agree with that, certainly. All right, as I mentioned earlier, we spoke with Neil Parrott, the Republican candidate, just a few weeks ago. And if you'd like to see his interview in its entirety, head to our streaming channel, WUSA9+, and look for it on the watch carousel at the bottom of the screen. This is where you will also find this interview with April McClain Delaney. We'll be back after the break.